Let's call the work session for the October 24th board meeting to order. First on the agenda tonight will be the pledge, led by myself. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
Okay. Anybody have any questions on the consent agenda?
I do have a question.
Okay.
I'm sorry, caught me off guard. Was somebody going to talk to us about?
Yeah, Mr. Reed, he's a director of Rutherford County Conservation. He'll come up here and go over some things. You want to take us through how the money flows, the cost, how the officials are determined, what kind of training they receive, and things of that nature?
Yes, sir. The way that the program is set up, we have two different leagues. We have a league that consists of Walter Hill and Wilson combined, and Lascassas and Kittrell. They have a league that those three schools play against each other. The way that the officials work, that league, those officials have been with us for the last 10 years, and it's the same officials every year. And the way that the money works for the games, every school's game, if Wilson is playing Lascassas, each one of those schools pay that official. So the official's fee is $20. So one school pays $20 and the other school pays $20 in that league, and they pay their own officials in that league.
Okay.
And the other league, the bigger league, that consists of 9 schools, that league, we have such a large amount of games, because that's over 600 games, because we have 85 teams in that league. Those officials, we run all of that through Eagleville. The reason that we've run it through Eagleville is Eagleville and McFadden started this league many years ago. And at the time when that started, Eagleville did away with booster clubs. So Eagleville was not going to run any junior basketball leagues through a booster club. It had to be ran through the school. So I was the head basketball coach at the time, and I did a fundraiser request form for my high school basketball, and I ran it through high school basketball. And everybody would pay their official fees, and that league, it's $20 per game. They would pay the school, and then the school would pay the officials. And the officials would check in, ref their games, and the person that's at the gym would make a list of the officials, and then those officials would be paid the following week to make sure that they did the right amount of games, or if a game was canceled for a team not showing up or something of that nature. And that money always went through Eagleville. Eagleville does not make a profit off of those games. They just pay the officials. They do the paperwork, the W-9s, and for all the tax reasons, they do all of that work.
Hey, Mr. Beaudry, would you give us the total amount of money last year that was paid out through that, for Eagleville, for the league he's discussing?
Yes, sir. It's for last school year, junior pro, they dispersed, and this is mainly for the salary supplements and for the referee, the stipends. It's $16,835.63. When you back out the cost for like shirts and some de minimis items, they're approximately $14,500 for referees for the entire school year for last year. And the revenue that was brought in, this gate proceeds, payments for the referees from the other schools he spoke about that came to Eagleville, is about $19,889.17. So that netted a profit for the fundraiser of $2,993.54 to Eagleville.
And I don't want to speak on behalf of Ms. Johnson, but when we look at the not to exceed, can you kind of go over that and kind of explain why this is, adds up to a lot, I think, more than what you just mentioned?
Spoke to, one of my bookkeepers in my office actually was the Eagleville bookkeeper for quite a while, and she said that, and correct me if I'm wrong, or she was wrong in this, is there was some that would do more refereeing than others. Some of these are probably $100-200 that they're getting for refereeing. The others would get more, so they put it to not to exceed that amount for, you know, those couple that were always going to be doing a lot of reffing, so they wouldn't exceed the amount. So that's why you see all of these people with, because it looks like, oh, how much are we paying out? That was just so they would have that cover if more coached, or I'm sorry, reffed these games.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that?
I just want to be very clear about a few things. So the numbers, and I appreciate Mr. Bodary sharing that with us, it is an extreme number. When you add it up, it's like 182,000 not to exceed. So I like the 16,000 number much better personally. But then how do we go about, how are a lot of these names look like are they young people? Do we do training for these officials? Is that done through Eagleville? Does it cost Eagleville anything? I mean,
The age to ref is 16, so some of the kids are younger. We try to get basketball players throughout the county because it's really hard for athletes in our county to work. So if coaches suggest us to take a kid in that they think would be good, we have a director of officials, and we have a commissioner over the league that does the scheduling. When those young people are required to come to junior pro practices throughout the county, we ask everybody who's scrimmaging, and we'll bring those referees in, and us three will train those referees to be. We do not charge to train these kids, and those kids are not paid to train. That's part of the requirement to be able to ref, is to get on the court and take the training.
I think it's a great program. I've had two of my sons have played in the program. I did not have a great understanding of this, and again, the numbers were of concern to me, but.
And we have to turn in the big list of refs, and some of those people may never ref a junior pro game, but we're so big, and we've gotten so big that we have to have a big list of ref, a pool to, and really in November, the first 2 weeks of November, when high school basketball really gets started, it's really hard for us to get refs those weekends because the refs that we depend on, the older refs, the TWS, refs, they're all pulled somewhere else. So we do have a big list of refs, but that's a pool to pull from instead of having to, at the last minute, go try to find someone. We send out emails, are you willing to come back again this year? And then we send them the paperwork, they fill out the paperwork, and then we build our ref schedule from there.
Right. I think it's great that we use our students and that they're a part of that program as well.
Right now, we have students from Riverdale, Oakland, Blackman, Eagleville, and Central Magnet that do refereeing.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate the information.
Question, if I may. So just to clarify for me, because, and I appreciate Ms. Johnson bringing this up, I think what was confusing, I know at least for me, was to look at this list and see these names and then see that $2,500 and that question of, are we just stroking a check for $2,500 for that individual, and seeing a lot of very similar names. So, but to me, I guess at the end of the day, I just want to clarify that these payments that are going out from the refs are not being funded by the school or by Rutherford County school system.
No, ma'am. It is generated through it costs $55 to play. Campus school charges $65 because they do not get to host games. The schools charge a $2 admission to only adults. No student in Rutherford County pays to get into those ball games, and they use that money to pay for the officials.
Okay, great. So there's no concern at all that they're not going to make enough to cover the cost of all those refs throughout the season?
No, ma'am. And they don't buy equipment either. The Conservation Board and the Recreation Department, we provide all equipment, all basketballs, anything that the junior pro program needs, we purchase that it's not purchased by the schools.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That it?
Are we back on the consent agenda? Yes, I would like to speak about the Laverne track.
Okay.
some questions.
Just-
If you're
Thank you,
finished-
Mr. Reed.
If you're finished with that.
All right. Let me go back there.
Second page.
All right.
I understand that this was moved from last year to this year because it's kind of a routine maintenance that they're doing on the track. But did you want me to say that? Okay. Our bathrooms at Laverne, we've got handicap stalls without doors on them. And where I see we need to maintain our fields correctly, I think there's more people that will benefit from us moving up the bathrooms to be redone and do the fields, the track field next year.
Okay, there's some problems with us changing that money. That money for the track has already been approved by the county commission. And to change that, we would have to go back through the process of health ed, finance, and the full commission, which would probably take us, what, 2 to 3 months, Mr. Lee? Is that correct?
We looked at that earlier today, and based on where we are, we would probably be the first meeting in March before we would have all, go through all the steps.
Okay, and you did tell me that the restrooms are on for next fiscal year, correct?
Yes, sir, they're in the capital projects list that I gave you guys earlier, the big list.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna be prioritizing some of that, maybe look at it different ways. But the restrooms are gonna be on that list for them, Smyrna, Oakland, Riverdale. If we were to go through this process, and I talked with Ms. Sharp earlier, to go through this process, it would be March. When capital projects, we would be June next year. So we would save maybe a month or two before I guess what I'm saying is we don't gain anything time-wise by going back, having to go back through the process. We wouldn't really gain anything to be able to start it next summer.
Mr. Lee, and I did look at that, and I have looked at it, we also have other schools on there too, on the
Yes, sir.
restrooms, and if I'm not mistaken, we got some schools like Riverdale and Oakland that are much older than Laverne that need some renovation of the restrooms, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And then, just so that I'm clear, this replacement of this track, this is a complete replacement, the surface and everything?
Yes, sir. And what we have found, Mr. Marshall's here, he can attest, we did his 2 years ago. What we're finding is we've waited so long due to funding to replace these tracks, the asphalt underneath them has deteriorated. At most schools, and at Oakland in particular, we had to repave the whole thing at an additional cost of $250,000 on top of what we see here. My concern is that Laverne, the asphalt underneath it, is deteriorating as well, and you can't get the full scope of that till you take the old track up. And I agree with Ms. Sharp, the bathrooms need renovating and they need some things, and we have sent maintenance down there a couple of times recently to do things. Some of these partitions are of such an age that we can no longer get parts. We're actually being creative to put doors back on them. Unfortunately, in a number of our schools, we have vandalism, and it's hard to keep these things. That's why in the new schools, we do block for our toilet partitions, and we use hollow metal frames and regular doors. It makes them, I'm not going to say they're vandal-proof, but it makes it a whole lot harder to tear them up.
So let me ask this question, and it maybe Mr. Spurlock, or maybe you, Mr. Lee, since later in the agenda, we've already received an ADA, Americans for Disability Act, letter from Mayor Ketron. So where does this play into that? I mean, we have handicap stalls that don't have doors on them.
Yeah, that's for the entire, it's not only the school system, but that's what we're responsible for. But we've got a period of time where we have to address these deficiencies. And I go back to the same thing, and I agree. I'm a proponent also for the restrooms, but we've also got other schools that are in similar conditions.
I'm
And,
not talking about the
yeah,
concession stand.
like I said, with the ADA thing, this is something we don't have to get fixed overnight. They give us some time frame to do it. Our first thing is we've got to go out and identify all the, if I'm not mistaken, we got to identify all, all inconsistencies or violations, or if you want to not call them violations, but issues, not only inside the school, but on the egress and ingress to the schools. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, and I'll be glad to address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and wait till later, but yes, you're correct. That
Okay,
is correct.
but in terms of the time frame in order to get this taking place, what is our
That's-
first step?
The first step is to identify our issues, and then we have 10 years to get them corrected.
Okay, but we obviously want to do that.
As
hopefully-
expediently as possible, but also in light of all the other things that we have, yes, we would like to, I don't want to say use the full term, but we're going to need to be judicious in how we go about it.
So that we can kind of get caught up on it, you and I had a long conversation with this. You know, normally when we build something, we add on to something in the past, we had to make sure it was ADA compliant. However, everything that existed prior to was grandfathered in. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir.
So they changed this, the feds did, right?
Yeah, basically, to kind of switch horses to the ADA thing, basically what's happened is prior to 2000, there was no really ADA compliance law. In the year 2000, they updated the ADA law on the schools and buildings, and even malls, and any commercial building had to be updated and it become ADA compliant, the entire structure. Anything built prior to that was grandfathered. However, if you went in and added on or remodeled or whatever, then you had to make what is called ADA accommodation. Does not mean you have to renovate every restroom in the facility, but you had to renovate some. So when we did Oakland and Riverdale, the addition to the annex and the remodel 13 years ago, of course, those new restrooms of the annex are ADA compliant. They become part of that building's compliance. In the older buildings where we were just remodeling, we went in and made one boys, one girls ADA compliant. That meets the code. What's happened is the Department of Justice has figured out that there's a lot of buildings, federal, county, it can be even rest stops, that fell into that grandfather and nobody was doing anything to upgrade them because they didn't have to. So the DOJ tied federal highway funds to a new bill, and they've empowered TDOT to be in charge of this because they were originally looking at sidewalks and access to get to the building. Roads, parking lots, sidewalks, those kinds of things. Well, the DOJ said, well, if we can get them outside, let's go on the inside and we'll get them there too. So they included inside your building. It's about a 7-step process. The county got their booklet from the DOJ in 2016. Somewhere along the way, the school system was forgotten. This project is due on December the 19th of this year. We were contacted 2 weeks ago. And I went and met with the county's ADA compliance officer to see what was required. They have since gotten us all the information. We have agreed that they have to have a letter of intent type document to the TDOT to tell them what their plan is. We have provided all of our school names, year built, square footage, things that we could provide very quickly. We provided that this week, with the understanding that we would probably need to take 4 to 6 months, along with everything else that we're doing, to begin to gather this information. We'll have to go out, self-analyze, photograph anything that we determine is non-ADA compliant, develop a cost for that, and submit it site by site. And then we have 10 years to fix it. I say all that to say nobody's providing us any funds to fix any of
I
it.
did see where it was not,
It's unfunded.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how this falls into this. And I'll
Let me ask you, in the interim, I'm assuming you've been down to Laverne and checked out some of their restrooms and stuff.
yes, sir.
Is there somehow, if we do not have something that's a stall, if you will, that will be ADA compliant, is there something we could do
Yes, sir.
in the interim?
Yes, and we're looking into that. And I think our biggest problem, correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that the toilet partitions are disarray and the door, we're having trouble keeping the doors on. In some locations, we have shower rods with curtains to give some privacy. But it's quite extensive. We are going back. I had our maintenance guys down there week before last. I was told that they felt like they had them in, I'm not going to call good shape, but they had them in privacy, fixed where the doors would latch. If there is doors missing, I have not heard back from Mr. Ash. If he's got doors missing since they were down there, I'm unaware of it, but I'll be glad to send them back down there this week to check it out again.
I've got a video from a parent that I can send to you.
Okay.
My question goes back to, since you were talking about the renovations, in Laverne, when they put the foyer on there, what year was the foyer put on? The new front?
School was opened in '88. I want to think that was 14 or 15 years ago that they put the foyers on them.
So there,
It was before my time, and it was done not,
No, I think it was a little bit, I think that was probably somewhere around maybe 2009, somewhere like that, that new front, the new foyer.
that would have been, it was completed before I came, and I've
It
been
was,
here.
it was completed prior to the previous administration leaving. So that had to be either 2008 or 2000, sometime in that time frame. I think, I could be wrong.
was there any,
It was finished right before, I'm backing up now, this is 19, I came here in '06, and it had finished in like
It may,
2004 or 2005, it finished right before I came.
may be, and you may be right on that.
I think it's 2004 or 2005.
okay, so there's bathrooms that have been there since 1988,
Yes, ma'am.
and then we did the foyer, and then there was no update on the bathrooms then, so it's been quite a while that they've had an update. So
I don't disagree. Now, to go back to what Mr. Spurlock is saying, I guess Oakland or Riverdale, other than one restroom that we did make ADA compliant was 1972, is that correct? So we've got a lot, and it's on the list, but Smyrna Middle School, the old part of that building opened in '61, and the original stalls and the original floors are still in there, in that school.
Ms.
Oh.
Harper, you?
yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak when,
Well,
thank you. So I want to go back and kind of put this into perspective because I'm still struggling a little bit with the whole, we'd have to go back to the county commission. The money, and this is again to articulate too for whoever might be watching, because I'm not sure that we did from the beginning, is that we're being asked to approve on the consent agenda right at $200,000 to replace and update the track surface at Laverne High. And it's coming out of capital projects,
And
correct?
it was a listed projects in this year's capital projects, yes.
Okay. And again, just in thinking about, the tax increases and all the concerns that are out there about how we spend the county's money. And I'll go back to even quoting a former county commissioner who said one time, and I remember it very clearly, I will never, ever approve money like this to go to fixing a sports sort of thing. I think it had to do with the concession stands and the bleachers at Laverne or Smyrna, when we have needs inside the school or needs inside the classroom. And quite frankly, I feel the same way. I'm not sure at this point, with all of the budget challenges we have and the growth that we're going through, that it's necessarily good stewardship of our money, especially not when we have issues like Ms. Sharp's brought up with these bathrooms. So here's my question for as far as you said, well, the county commission had approved this and we would have to go back to them. My understanding has always been that, yes, the county commission approves our money. They tell us how much money we can spend. They tell us how much we can put in our budget. But it's always been my understanding that they can stipulate, yes, this is a capital project, dollars or what have you, but that the decision as to where to spend those dollars rests with the school board. Is that not a correct understanding? And that may be a question for our attorney. I don't know.
It's my understanding that it was approved by this board and it was approved by the county commission. Capital projects are slightly different than our regular budget. They approve our capital projects for a dollar figure and a project. It's the same thing with Central Magnet. We had the chiller money in there last year for the chiller, and we wanted to use that money at Blackman. We had to go back through the whole process to be able to move the money from Central Magnet to Blackman.
First thing we had to do is get the board to approve it.
Yes, y'all would have to approve it first. Then once that's approved, we would go back to Health and Ed.
So in our chillers and all the things we've got going on with the heat and air issues and stuff, those are capital projects as well.
So, some of them are, yes, and Siegel was.
And I just, and I understand a new track's needed, don't want it misunderstood, but again, to me, it goes back to the whole battle over the bleachers and the concession stands at the football fields and the other argument that, hey, we use these a few times a year for a month out of the year, we're going to spend close to $250,000 to repair an athletic thing when we have those kind of other needs that are serious in the capital projects.
Is there a dollar amount that throws it into the capital expenditures?
And I'll have Mr. Jordan left, he's our expert on that. But the way capital projects work, the way it used to work, the school board had to go to the county commission, Health and Ed, every time they had what they called a capital expense. In other words, you needed to buy a chiller, you needed to do these kinds of things, tracks, large ticket items. Define large ticket. I mean, to me, $10,000 is a large ticket, but I think in the county commission's mind, it's kind of like 25 to 50,000 is kind of a ballpark frame. Anything over that is and we get there's a separate fund, and I still call it Dr. Bullen money, but he's the one who started it. He took a nickel at the time and set it aside, and it was just for the school board so that we didn't have to go over there every time we needed to spend $25,000. He said, let's take a nickel of the sales tax, give them that money. They just come in here with a list of stuff, and we're going to approve that list, and then they're not going to have to come over here every time they need some money. And they were kind of putting us in a look forward type situation. Tell us what you need now, what you're going to need. And that's kind of what we've done. And whether it's a nickel or 6 cents or 4 cents, it's kind of gone up and down over the years. But they do look at that separately and different as far as approval and voting. And we do have to provide them with a list. And Mr. Beaudry in the finance department has to track it by project. We have to keep it all separate for accounting purposes.
The capital project fund, in fact, it's based on, for GAP, it's the project. It's like you were saying, in the general purpose school fund, they, once our operating budget that you guys hammer out, and it's here, and if we need a budget amendment, move something around, of course, it goes through you and then goes up. But through acceptance accounting principles, because it's a capital project fund, it's approved not on an annual basis, because some of these things can overlap. Some of the projects, it's approved by the project, not the fiscal year. Thus, we come up with the projects that we're going to do.
Okay, yeah, no, I get that part. Again, what I guess I'm questioning is why, if the money's already been allocated and approved for our capital projects, with it being a specific project, we would have to go back. You know, if the board made a decision, this money is going to be better spent elsewhere right now. We've got needs that are more important than repairing an athletic track, which I believe we do, that we would have to take that back to the commission. But I guess to me, even if we do, at this point, you know, out of my concern and the dollar amount with this, I would request, and I don't know what the proper procedure is for this, that we take this particular item off the consent agenda and put it in as a voting item separately for the agenda for Thursday night. Mr. Chairman, how do we do that?
I mean, just put it on a regular voting, on our
Right, because
regular.
otherwise it's lumped in as a part of the consent agenda, and we either have to vote for everything or not. I think it needs to be a separate voting item.
Did you make a motion?
So you make a motion for that?
Is that how we need to do it? Mr. Reed?
Tomorrow
Tomorrow
night.
night, yeah, we can't do it.
Okay, right. This is just a work session.
For the board to remove an item from the consent agenda, a board member needs to make that motion, it needs to be seconded, and the board needs to approve that. The item would come off the consent agenda and go on the regular agenda at that point, and then be full discussion of that.
If I may, Mr. Reed, while you're there, could you tell me what goes into the consent agenda as a general rule? How it's put in the consent agenda? How do we determine what goes in the consent agenda and what is standalone vote?
Largely, it's just a kind of the history and practice over time of what items go in the consent agenda. If there are particular items that you as a board member think you do not want to have in the consent agenda and want to have on the regular agenda, then that needs to be made known. And when the agenda is put together, for each meeting, those items can be put on the regular agenda as opposed to the consent agenda.
If I understood correctly, then we could request it in advance. For instance, like when we get the agenda posted and we see it, we could go to the chairman and the director and request that it be moved off the consent agenda. Or if it comes up like this in the work session, then we would have to make the formal motion
Correct.
at the actual board meeting to change it.
Either way, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You know, on these consent agendas, these have been at one time brought to the board's attention, and including the capital projects,
Yeah, and they
or they wouldn't
typically
be on the
consented.
consent. So just in fairness, to make sure we understand, this has been brought forward before, where it's been seen. But so I just making sure we're not just arbitrarily putting something on a consent agenda.
Yeah, I mean, consent agenda consists of various things. Sometimes they're very routine matters that the board over time has said, well, we really don't want, just put it on a consent agenda, we don't need to take this up, and if anyone has an issue with it, we always can pull it off and discuss it on the regular agenda as you're talking about doing for tomorrow.
I just wanted to know what qualified
Yeah.
it to put in there.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Mr. Young?
Mr. Lee, have we assessed all the schools, the restrooms at all schools, to see which ones are in bad shape?
My list, the ones that are the worst are on your capital projects list for this coming year. It's Smyrna Middle, Laverne High, Smyrna High, Oakland, Riverdale are the ones that are in the worst shape.
Which ones is the worst of the worst?
It's varying degrees at different places. I've been asked to rank them. I was asked that today, if I would rank them, and I would. There's different issues at different ones. Pushed in a corner, I would say maybe from a disrepair, broken, torn up, I would have to say probably Smyrna and Laverne. But an overall, I don't think I would rank one over the other. It'd be like picking between your children. And I don't mean that to sound like I'm trying to get out of it, but they all need work.
I'm just curious, I mean, if we're gonna fix one, I'd like to see us go ahead and take care of all of them.
That's why I have them all on the list for this coming year. If I had to pick one, I would eventually make a choice, but it's very difficult. Some of it's age, some of it's abuse, some of it's father time, some of it's a little bit of everything. I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question. Trying to give you as much information as I can.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Got a question. I guess if we pull this off the agenda, what are we gonna do with it?
If I understood correctly, they're asking to take it off the consent agenda and actually have it as an individual voting item. So you could still vote on it.
I understand that, but
If it goes away, then we don't repair Laverne's track. Laverne's track is the last one of all the schools that hasn't been replaced, and the deterioration is gonna continue. And it will cost somebody or more money later, or they don't have track at Laverne.
I understand that, but even if we take it off, vote it down, or whatever the case is, you're still not gonna do nothing with the bathrooms just because of the timetable, correct?
To go back through the process, we would be March, I guess is what I'm trying to say, before we would have approval to move forward. School is out in June, so I see March, April, May. By the time we put this project out for bid, it would probably be sometime in May before a contractor could start.
I guess the other question, not the question, the comment is, we voted on this. Do it, correct?
Yes, sir.
I mean, for this year.
Yes, sir.
So I guess the hard part for me is if you can't do nothing till March or April, whatever the case is, and you've got money allotted for it, I don't think it's a good decision on our part, just put the thing on the back burner and let it cost us more down the road. That's my personal opinion.
I mean,
And maybe I didn't explain, that's what I was trying to explain earlier. By the time we get to where we could actually do something, it's May. This money's, and I'm not trying to sway your vote, but I'm saying if it's on the capital projects for next year and we make it a priority, we're going to start in June or July. So there's only a month or two difference. If we could start tomorrow on the bathrooms based on the money, then maybe it's a different discussion from my viewpoint. But based on the time frame and there only being a month or two difference, now whether you spend the money on the track or not spend the money on the track based on Ms. Moore's argument, that to me that's different. I'm just looking at the time factors, what I'm trying to say.
so let me ask this, was there a vote last year? Because since it was scheduled to be the track, was there a vote last year that changed it since it was already scheduled to be done last year, to be pushed off to this year?
When the capital projects went through last year, there were certain things that taken off. So we took Blackman, we took Laverne off because it was in better shape, and we did Riverdale is the one we're finishing this year because Riverdale was in worse shape. We said, it's like a lot of things. We can put this one off another year. We're not going to be able to get enough money to do both of them at the same time. Which one? I had to prioritize, so we chose Riverdale. That moved Laverne to this year. So when we voted on our capital projects, when you all voted for capital projects for this year's budget, Laverne was on that list, and yes, ma'am, it was voted for. So it wasn't moved, it was just, we had to prioritize last year. So it was, we said we could get by another year, so we did Riverdale. We've been trying to do one a year. So the Laverne was this year's budget. And we have to wait till that.
But it
The
was
reason it's
originally-
just now getting to us to write the PO and get approval is we have to wait till football season's over to be able to start the work.
But it was originally scheduled for last year, and y'all just put it off because the other field was worse.
Yes. That is correct.
I mean, I guess my whole intent with this was when I saw the $200,000 was that these bathrooms are really bad. And if it was my home, I would want my house to be taken care of first versus the landscaping. And the north end needs so much as it is, and we've got to start somewhere.
May I ask, Chairman, one more question? Maybe you already addressed this, and I apologize if you did. We're talking about the 200,000, and I understand the issue with having to go back to county commission, all the capital improvements. Have we even assessed what our number is for the restrooms? Are we getting ahead of it here, even if we could reallocate that money?
We have not gone through the bid process. I have gotten pricing from a couple of our contractors. They've gone to each school and assessed one restroom as a courtesy to give me some budgetary numbers. I've taken those budgetary numbers and applied it to the number of bathrooms in each school to come up with the numbers that I have in my capital project. Do I anticipate when we put them out as a whole on the street to bid them, that it could be a little bit less? But I've got $250,000 allotted for Laverne High School.
And that was in that packet that you
Yes, sir.
showed during the strategic plan, right?
Large $68 million breakdown, those numbers are included in that. When I gave you that long, and it's in there.
One last thing. I mean, you may have already said this, I apologize. The bid process, if we did have the money, we could use it however we wanted to right now, and we did choose to move this item down to the agenda. How long is that process? What would be the best case scenario in making improvements? Will we still be out to next year?
If we could move the money tomorrow, the bidding process would take 4 to 6 weeks. Then we could start, but we could probably only do one bathroom at a time. So the answer to your question is we could probably start by Christmas, doing one bathroom at a time.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And if we do next year the bathrooms, then we can make them ADA compliant
At the same time.
at the same
Yes, sir.
time. You did say that Laverne was the last track to get fixed, right?
Yes, sir.
And if we go back and take it off, then we're only going to save maybe
Couple months.
a couple of months.
Yes, sir.
All right. So we're going to take that $200,000 and put it in restrooms next year. Well, it looks like, to me, I know after working at Oakland High School for many years, they've got a lot needs done. Riverdale's got a lot needs done. Laverne, Smyrna. If we're going to prioritize it to next year, then I'd like to go ahead and leave things like they are and make sure next year we get the restrooms fixed. Anybody else? Okay, is there anything else on the consent agenda? All right. Get through all this Igable stuff. Okay, I guess next thing is the textbook committee.
Yeah, the textbook selection committees for adoption of textbooks is found on tab 2. The names and qualifications of the following individuals under tab 2 are being submitted for appointment for the 2019-2020 English Language Arts Instructional Materials Committee upon the board approval. The appropriate forms are included with the document, which includes the parents and experts to serve on this respective committee, each respective committee.
Okay, any questions on that? Okay, Stewartsboro PTO.
All right, this is found also on tab 3. Stewartsboro parents have come together with the school administration to start the process of forming a PTO. The organization has completed the initial steps required and drafted bylaws, and the school administration approves the formation of this organization. The members are dedicated to supporting Stewartsboro teachers, students, and staff through fundraising, events, and volunteer coordination.
Okay. And you told me that they did away with their organization a few years ago?
Several years back, yes, sir. And this new
No.
administration would like to reorganize.
Any questions? Okay, special education.
All right, this was approved earlier for, July 30th of this year by the board for 3 positions to address the disproportionality that was, we were designated as for the 2017-18 school year. What this does is just spell out the job description for this one of these positions, the special education liaison job. This is a new position that was previously approved by the board. The job description addresses the work for at-risk students with disabilities to better align to use disproportionality funding. This position will be utilized to assist students in day treatment and juvenile detention center by providing instructional support to decrease behavior.
Any questions on that? Okay, John Coleman Annex.
All right, John Coleman Annex, I forwarded you guys the copy of the lease agreement that was signed, I think, in 2017 for a period of 20 years with a option of departing with a 90-day notice. Of course, is there anything else, Mr. Lee or Mr. Beaudry, that y'all want to add to that agreement?
We looked at, we're just talking about the agreement right now.
Right, the lease agreement, yeah.
I don't have anything.
Okay, nothing?
About Mr. Reed.
I don't know how much I have to add. I'll just remind the history of this. This came back before the board back in 2017. At the time, it came, I'm looking at the old agenda item that came before the board at that point. And at that point, this is what the agenda item was. It's John Coleman Annex, Mid-Cumberland Head Start Lease Agreement. The lease agreement between Rutherford County Board of Education and Mid-Cumberland Action Agency for a portion of John Coleman School Annex is complete. The State Fire Marshal is requiring upgrades in the fire hydrant location outside with 30 added smoke detectors inside and the addition of a fire-rated separation wall in the main interior hallway. The requirements are stricter for preschool students than the older, larger students, so Mid-Cumberland is bearing the expense of about $150,000 for these and various other items. And basically, we set up this long-term lease. At that time, it was the perception this program was a good program for the school system, was brought in there at that point to provide services to the school and our students, which we thought at that time were going to be good for the school system and the students as well. The lease agreement is a long-term lease, but did have a provision where either party can terminate upon 90 days' notice to the other party. So though it was long-term, it did allow either party to walk at some point upon giving the other party 90 days advance notice. So if for some reason the board wants to take some different action on this, you can terminate the lease upon giving 90 days advance notice. Now, this really has started with the board this time because the school system got notice that Mid-Cumberland Agency was no longer going to be the sponsor of the Head Start program, and there was a new administrator being changed to start that program, which is the new organization that contacted the school system. And that's really how this whole matter came up, was they said, we may want to renew the lease, we'd like to talk to you about the lease, and that they brought it to our attention, which would make you think that they think the current lease is no longer in effect because they're not the leasing party. There's a new, but they are administering the same Head Start program that has been there previously. Now, whether the Head Start program is what is good overall, we can talk about that, what that program does for the school system, what other affiliated services they have been providing, and I know Ms. Page has gotten information together on that, and that's something the board may want to look at considering. But I guess, if, of course, you don't have to take any action on this at all. If you do think that you want to use that space for other purposes, and there are other better uses for that school space, you need to determine whether we want to keep these people in place for the rest of the school year, or maybe just give them 90 days notice to vacate, or just what you want to do long-term with that program and that building.
Mr. Reed, on that, not to interrupt you, but on that, the amount they paid for the upgrades and stuff like that, there is some information that we do have pertaining to what they currently owe us. So if you want to kind of talk on that a little bit.
Yes, sir. Based on the current lease, they were supposed to be providing, just a basic rent, like $100 a year, but they were also supposed to be paying a prorated portion of the utilities based on the square footage of the leased area compared to the annex building as a whole. They were also supposed to be taking care of just basic maintenance of their area. And it was also to just for the upkeep, the cleaning of their area. Got to looking at, we had never received any funding from them, anything for rent, and also for the cost of the utilities. So Mr. Lee was gracious enough, he had one of his gentlemen went down and rolled the square footage of the area on the lease agreement, which is, if there's a diagram that was approved by the board originally on the annex. Of course, the shaded portion is what Mid-Cumberland has. And then I pulled the cost of going back 26 months, August 1st, 2017, when the lease began, forward to September 30th of this year, last month. As far as repairs, we had a total for that building, $8,063.06. Also had one full-time custodian assigned to the John Coleman Annex, and when you look at 26 months of this gentleman's salary and benefits that the county paid, when you bring in life insurance, health insurance, disability, FICA, employer match, that arrived at $102,826.65 for that employee. And then the utilities, the electric bill alone for those 26 months for John Coleman Annex was $124,132.71. Prorate that based on the 23,000 square feet that was assigned to Mid-Cumberland out of a total of 29,750 square feet of the John Coleman Annex, which brings it 77.3% of the square footage assigned to the Head Start. And that brings a total of what they owe us as of September 30th of last month of $181,873.14. And that does not include water, gas, and the mowing, which I could extrapolate from the contractor that's assigned to that. Haven't done that yet, but that's at that point, that's where I'm at right now with what they owe us for this lease.
And I think Mid-Cumberland Head Start is not going to be anymore, and CDI is a governmental entity that takes over these type programs till a new facilitator is found. So they basically is a caretaker and just kind of keep the ball rolling.
How many students do we have enrolled right now in that program? Do we have a number?
120?
120? Okay.
So, question if I may. If I remember correctly from the conversation we had at a previous board meeting about this, they originally were not in the annex. They were in trailers, thank you, whatever. And they moved into the school. So did we actually redo a formal lease based on them having access to the actual annex? Okay.
That's the lease.
But then I think there was more conversation about how much space, in other words, how many classrooms they were using kind of grew over time. Did that get written into the lease, or?
Well, what we did not know when we had that conversation is that there actually was a lease, and we did not know, and I say we, meaning me, Sarah, and Doug, we didn't know what that lease looked like.
So I'm not totally
They
confused.
were able to provide us a lease. which we did not have here.
So again, I guess and I understand correctly from the documents that the lease requires 90 days' notice if we did decide to terminate. But again, it goes back to me, the question of legally, is it their lease anymore since the entity has changed?
Well, we have a lease with Mid-Cumberland.
Right, but I'm
So,
talking about the new
so we
entity
do
that's
not have a
taking
lease
over.
with CDI. So what the specific arrangement is between CDI and Mid-Cumberland, we have not seen the legal documents between those two entities, so I can't really comment on that fully.
Okay.
We did get a letter from CDI that implied that they recognized they did not have a lease to the school, to this facility, and wanted to talk to us about doing a new lease.
Right, and if I remember correctly, they were even suggesting some changes that would be of more benefit to them and not so much to the school system.
Right. But with the current arrangement with Mid-Cumberland, I think there was a lease, and it was approved by the board, and that's the document we went back and looked at and saw. So, and I think after going out there, my understanding, they are, I think, honestly, occupying only the portion of school that was leased to them.
Okay, thank you.
So I think, there was discussion about them occupying more than what, but after we checked it, I don't think that was the case.
Mr. Reed, what's the, we're talking about this $182,000. What's our chance of getting that money back?
I don't know. I'll have to look at those numbers. I know we'll have to look at those numbers. Those amounts have not been billed to Mid-Cumberland, so no bill has yet been submitted to Mid-Cumberland for those amounts.
Whatever figures he comes up is what's owed to us, correct? Based on the lease.
I've heard his numbers, yes. So we need to listen. I probably need to go through those, make sure they're consistent with the lease, that we can bill those items, and then if we can bill those items, a bill needs to be submitted to Mid-Cumberland for whatever they owe us.
Okay, and another question for me, if I may. If I understand correctly, the space that the classrooms that they're using right now, we could very easily use that space. Am I correct? In other words, it's needed. for the
Yes,
school
ma'am.
system.
We're short on space.
There's nothing, is it? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a question. Sorry. There was a point made about the 150,000. Were those renovations that they invested initially? Can you kind of clarify some of that for me? Because it kind of sounds like, well, I'm awfully confused, to be honest with you, but it kind of sounds like that might be looked at as a wash and that we shouldn't be charging them the 180, but the whole thing is a mess. But
That would be something up to the board, but that is an option.
It was the fire.
The $150,000 was a budgetary number. They did spend, and I'm going off memory because I helped them with getting a contractor, because at the time this was going on, we were building John Coleman's new school. The city and the state required that because it was a preschool, we had to relocate a fire hydrant, somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 to move this fire hydrant. So I think at the time, the budgetary number was used of approximately 150 because they put it in the contract. So yes, they did spend a significant amount. Was it actually $150,000? Maybe a little less. But yes, they did spend quite a bit of money on that hydrant location.
And there's nothing in the lease that would say, in place of that 150 that they spent, or whatever they spent, why were we never billing them for what the lease agreement stated? And now we have to go back and decide whether we can even bill it later on.
We could bill it. The question is whether Mid-Cumberland could pay it. That's because I'm implying, and I'm not a lawyer, is that Mid-Cumberland has basically notified the government they're going out of business. Whether it's due bankruptcy or whatever, they can't make any money or whatever, they're going out of business. The federal government has hired CDI, or they're a governmental takeover company. They're not going to be long-term. But if Mid-Cumberland goes out of business and they're going to keep the Head Start program going, CDI has to have a contract with us. They've told us, or told me in an email, that they are looking for another company to take over Head Start. They're not going to be long-term, we're here to take over and run it forever. They're an intermediary. With Cumberland Head Start no longer being in business, they have to have a lease with us.
I think I would caveat, I would say that Mid-Cumberland, I think, is not going out of business. I think they're just not administering the Head Start program anymore. So I think there will be other things they administer, but they chose, for whatever reason, to not administer the Head Start program anymore. So when there has to be an administrator for that type of program, when they choose not to do that anymore, CDI is an interim organization that comes in and administers it until a full-time administrator can be found. And that's kind of what Mr. Lee was getting to. So the Head Start program is still in existence and still continuing. If CDI continues the program and continues at this facility, it's all the same personnel, same people. There's no change of employees at the school level in regards to this. So it's all the same personnel that are there today. The only other thing I would note is, one of the reasons I think that this was done back in 2017, and one of the things that was in the board agenda package was this lease agreement would ensure that portables at John Coleman currently being used by the Mid-Cumberland Head Start program be moved off-site at the expense of Mid-Cumberland. And they will make room for a new playground for the new John Coleman Elementary School. So that was another, I guess, factor that was considered back in 2017 when this came before the board.
Just another question I got, Mr. Reed. As you said, Mid-Cumberland's not going out of business. I take it they would still be responsible for these utilities.
I don't know of any reason they would not be responsible for what they owe the school system under the lease.
I guess, not to be critical, I guess my question to somebody is why we haven't been collecting the money.
That's a good question.
I think the better question is how come we didn't have a copy of the lease?
That probably is what it is. That's probably the answer. I'll find out, but it's probably because we weren't aware in
I
finance.
understand. I'm just saying if the money's owed to us, I think we ought to get it.
Yeah, they need, accounting needs to be done of what monies are owed, and they need to be billed for it. I did talk to the lady who is the current head of the Head Start program, and she told me she understood that money was owing, and she understood they needed to pay, there was monies that were owing. We did not talk about the specific amount, because I didn't have the amount we talked about, but she acknowledged there were amounts due. And she thinks she paid that $100 rent per year. She was telling me she thought she had paid that. So that's one of the things we need to check on. But
I've checked, I can't find where that rent, and now we're just talking about $100. We're talking about the $100. I can't find that.
right.
And I checked with, today I called down, we checked with John Coleman Elementary with the activity fund bookkeeper just on the off chance and looked through the records. There's nothing down there from them. I was just checking to see if there was.
Well, it's easy enough to determine if it was, they will have a check or something that was paid at once.
Correct.
But they need, in the end, we need to get an accounting done of what is owed. That needs to be billed to them, and I think they acknowledge there's amounts that they will need to pay.
I've got a question, if I may. Not being familiar with the Head Start program, I've heard of it for years, but I don't know exactly what they do. What is the difference in the Head Start program and, say, Miss Emily Mitchell's preschool or pre-K class that we have at Rocky Fork?
It's younger, 3-year-olds actually go to there. They're younger kids.
So the pre-K that we have now, that Miss Emily has, is,
Right, a little older than that,
it's older.
like 4.
Four,
yeah,
okay.
something like that, yeah. Paige, do you have some language out of the proposed contract that they sent you?
Yes,
The changes?
yes. The contract that we discussed at the last meeting related to our service of meals to the students. We countered the contract proposal they had, and we've not obviously executed that contract, but they eliminated all of the language related to the insurance and us accepting liability. They agreed to eliminate that language, and they also agreed to the updated prices on the lunch. So that would have increased what they would pay us for food based on an idea that they'd have about 96 students at the start of the school year and 12 staff that we feed breakfast and lunch to, from in the low 60s to $78,000. So they did that problematic language that was in the contract, they agreed to eliminate. but that's just for provision of food, because the food is cooked at John Coleman Elementary and brought over for the students and for staff. That's there early in the morning.
The one thing that we talked about, you know, even had a discussion about was space. And we know that our alternative school, especially at Smyrna West, is very insufficient to handle the volume that they've been seeing down there. Also, we are also pushed for space here in our district office. John Coleman could afford us the ability to bring back our nutrition program with our supervisor here on campus, on our campus. It would provide us the opportunity to move the students that are current and the staff that are currently at Smyrna West to John Coleman, and even grow capacity in that respect. So, you know, one of the things we got to keep in mind, I mean, obviously, we all know this, but every little small space that we have is a space that we need. And I believe in Head Start. I truly do, and I think they do a great job. But how do we, I guess my question is, how do we go before our commission and request funding to build additional space if we don't already take care of what we currently have? And I think we have, but I don't know if we knew that we had this ability. And I you know, I think you have a great responsibility on your hands to make that decision, but that's something that the board will have to make the decision on, obviously.
Mr. Director, I was going to say, and I agree with you completely, and I know the Head Start is a good program, and we would certainly hate to have to ask them to leave, but we have to prioritize our students and our school system first, and we need that space. To me, that's the bottom line. You know, hate to have to ask them to leave, but we need that space. And so I guess my question would be, whether it's for the chairman or for the attorney, because it's not really written this way on the agenda, what do we need to do as a board to get it on the agenda where we make that a formal voting item that we're going to make the decision to terminate the contract with Mid-Cumberland or Head Start, whoever's got it?
Well, we can put it on the agenda, right?
The agenda's already been published this time, so if you want to put that item for an agenda, I put it for an upcoming meeting agenda item, because you've already published the agenda for this upcoming meeting tomorrow.
Thank you.
That will give you adequate public notice to everybody at that point. They can't argue about it.
Okay. That's what we need to do then. I got one other question. Since it's this time of year, do we give them to the end of the school year?
I think the conversation we had at our last board meeting when we talked about this was that we would probably let them stay through the end of the calendar year, that would give time for the transition too over the holidays. But I don't know if that's acceptable now with this new contract that we found, or...
So long as there's a 90-day notice, the board can determine when they'd like that 90 days to start.
Well, and that's the problem, because even where we are tonight, the end of the year would not be 90 days.
Right.
But again, I go back to my question of, are we legally bound by that contract when it's no longer Mid-Cumberland?
We would need more information, like Mr. Reed said, about the relationship between CDI and Cumberland.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Facilities use.
Yeah, facility use approved for exemption pursuant to board policy 3.206, public education schools and institutions, post-secondary education institutions, private universities and colleges, governmental entities or agencies that provide benefits to the Rutherford County school system or have an in-kind relationship approved by the director of schools may request the Board of Education to allow an exemption from the use of facility fee, which the board may allow or deny based on details of specific requests. We've got the Cub Scout Pack 307 at Wilson Elementary, the Girl Scouts at Cedar Grove and Rock Springs Elementary, Murfreesboro City Schools at Bradley Academy home basketball games at Holloway, Rutherford County Conservation Board, open gym at Rockville Elementary School, junior pro basketball at Rockville Elementary School and Christiana Elementary School, Smyrna Junior Basketball League located at Cedar Grove Elementary School, and Stewart's Creek Middle's Drama Club craft fair located at Stewart's Creek Middle. Now, you'll notice the asterisk on the Cub Scouts and the Girl Scouts. That's pending a submission and approval of MOU, which would include a service project or some in-kind.
That's right. I have a final draft from my office of what that MOU will look like. I'm going to send that over to Mr. Reed this week for approval. And the Girl Scouts have already sent an idea of what they were thinking in our Boy Scout troop. So we should have a form, and we'll start including that in the facility use packet after we both look at it, and you'll get to see what those projects are.
Okay. Facilities.
All right, facilities, this is the site plan out at 10 Oaks, and I'm going to let Mr. Lee tell you what we're going to go forward and do here.
We bid the mass grading. We were planning on doing this project in 3 stages, mass grading and then final grading utilities to kind of expedite things along. We did bid this yesterday. We received 1 bid due to a couple of different circumstances. So at this time, we're going to withdraw this from the meeting, and we'll probably rebid this site, take phase 1 and phase 2 and put them together and bid it again in about 6 weeks.
Next is Laverne High School Principal Dirk Ash has requested permission to renovate LHS letters on the hill in front of the school. Engineering and Construction has reviewed the request and found the letters in disrepair. Mr. Ash has contacted the MTSU Concrete Management Department and found that contractors who will work with the school at a discounted rate, the cost to exceed no more than $13,000.
The school funds, right? Any questions on that? Okay, we'll move right along.
All right, the information only was for information. That was what we discussed prior to. This is, it deals with the ADA. I think we've gone through that. If there's any more questions from Mr. Reed, he'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
No questions? All right. The all-important insurance update.
We have our meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock, so we'll do an update tomorrow night.
Okay, thank you. Director's update.
We'll be giving you something tomorrow night.
Okay. Tennessee Legislative Network, Ms. Johnson.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow night. Federal Relations.
I'll have an update for you tomorrow.
Okay. General discussion. Okay, there's no discussion. We're adjourned.